Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of the book that you see in front of you, Setting Up a Home Car Workshop. What I want to do in today's video is talk about storage units that you can build for your workshop. All of the storage units that I'm going to cover are ones that I have built myself and ones that I use in my own car workshop, so they are things that I can speak to from experience. Let's start off by looking at a storage unit for nuts and bolts. This stores nuts, bolts, washers, all sorts of fasteners, all sorted out. And what might surprise you is it's made largely from baking trays. Yes, each of these trays are normally sold in shops as baking trays. Obviously we're not using them in that application here, but they work very, very well. When you are selecting trays for use in a storage unit of this sort, in the shop, grab the tray at each end and try and twist it. The strongest ones are made from steel and they'll be quite rigid. You also want trays that are sufficiently deep to be able to store a good number of fasteners, and these particular ones are non-stick coated, and the benefit to us is that means they won't rust. So you can see that the trays are supported in a wooden framework. Now, to make that framework, you basically make a frame of this sort. So pieces of timber screwed and glued to an outside supporting piece of timber. The trick is to make these gaps identical and to make the distance between the gaps identical, because that's where the lips of the trays actually slide. Now, to make the gaps identical, I inserted a piece of steel between the two pieces of timber, screwed and glued them to the frame, and then took the piece of steel out, did the next one, worked my way down. To make the gaps between the trays the same, I just use the same width of timber. So you buy these timber in long lengths and just cut it to size, cut the lengths off, and then of course all the widths will be the same. Start at one end, work your way down, and on the opposite side start at one end and work your way down in the same direction. Obviously you want the spacings and the slots to be mirror images of each other. You do need to make the frame pretty strong. There's quite a lot of weight in those trays when they're full of fasteners, but really it's a case of just being patient and being careful, and you too can have a storage unit of that sort. I made this one a couple of years ago and it's worked faultlessly ever since. One of the advantages, if I go back to this, is that you can pull the tray out partly to be able to get your hand in to get the fasteners, or you can pull the tray out completely because nothing holds it captive, and you can then take it to wherever you're working on a particular job. So if you're in working on a far end of your workshop, for example, you just take the tray to you where you're working, and then that makes it really easy, and you can just return it equally easily. All right, let's have a look now at something a bit different. So what we have here is a storage mechanism for the offcuts of steel and aluminium and so on that you invariably end up getting. Now, if you put all these offcuts on a horizontal shelf, it's very hard because you never know quite what's down the bottom, and you can never really be bothered digging through to find that piece of steel when you really do want it. Whereas here, it's all easily accessible and it's also all easily seen. So what is it? It's a square frame that's been welded up from tube. Across the top piece of the frame, I've welded some mesh. This sort of mesh is available in offcuts from when people are laying concrete, things of that sort. There's a mesh welded in here, and there's a mesh welded here. Now, below the bottom one and spaced below that is a wooden floor. In this case, it's a panel that's made from flooring, particle board. So how do you use it? Well, you simply insert the piece of steel or whatever it might be through a gap in the top, make sure it goes through an appropriate gap in the bottom, and it will stay captive there. And you can use these different areas to sort it into different types of RHS or different materials. It's all easily able to be seen, and by simply reaching over the top and pulling it out, it's also all easily able to be accessed. If you have the clearance, the vertical clearance in your workshop, it can be quite tall too. This can extend 2-3 meters, 2-3 yards above this. To give you a scale, from here to here is about a meter, about a yard. Very effective. I've spaced mine up off the floor. I'm actually supporting it by the workshop's frame, steel frame of this workshop, and that gives me room underneath to put lots of other storage. But you could have it on the floor if your frame of your shed was not appropriate to be supporting something. Of course, this can get quite heavy. That's something to keep in mind. Talking about heavy, This is an example of a cupboard I built. I actually built 3 of them, and I hadn't intended building any of them until I went and bought a steel cupboard to store tools and other pieces of equipment, and I found that to buy a steel cupboard of sufficient quality was going to cost an arm or a leg. The cupboards that I originally bought, the steel cupboards, they were still expensive, but they were absolutely hopeless. Whenever I put anything heavy on a shelf, they'd bow, they'd bend, the doors wouldn't shut. In the end, I returned them and said, I'll build my own. So what do we have here? Well, we have a steel frame made out of square tube. That's the black elements you can see. On each shelf, we have a heavy piece of flooring timber, the sort of particle board that's used to support floors, or actually form the floors. It's both stiff and strong, and it resists moisture better than most particle boards. And the front doors, there's a door each side, they're also made from the same heavy flooring material. You might say, why? Why use heavy flooring material for the doors? It's because you can then hang things on the inside of the doors, sometimes quite heavy things, and they don't bow or bend. To give the clearance to hang things on the inside of the doors, these shelves don't come right to the front. You can see there's a little inset there to give that room so that when the doors shut with those items on the inside of the doors, they don't actually foul the shelves. Here's an example of one of the cupboards in use. In this case, I have made little aluminium fittings that hold files on the left and the right, and they're not heavy, but you'll see heavy stuff being used on the doors in a moment. Up here is a steel tray with tools I don't use very frequently, heavy. Another one here, heavy, and then here's a very heavy item. This is a tray I made out of plywood. Plywood's good for making trays, get quite thick plywood. Half inch, 10mm plywood or 12, something of that sort, and then screw and glue it together. And this is full of brass plumbing fittings. Whenever I see plumbing fittings going cheaply or being thrown away, I grab them, and invariably I end up getting some valve or something else that needs a particular fitting, and here it's going to be. Down the bottom, glue and sandpaper. So working effectively in use. Now, how were they made? Well, because I was going to make 3 cupboards, I therefore needed 6 sides to the frames. I thought I'd do a simple jig. So here's a panel of flooring material, which later I chopped up and used as the shelves. And on each side, I've got some pieces of offcut timber, screwed to this panel, such that when I cut the steel to size, I can just slot it into place, and then when it's held in that place, I can weld, turn it over, weld on the other side. Every shelf is in the right place, every shelf support, everything is square. It's really quick and easy. If you're building more than 2 of anything of this sort of device, it's often better to make a jig. Here's one of the shelf jigs, or shelves being made in the shelf jig. Same idea, timber. Here's the left-right part of the shelf support, and here's a part that supports the center of the shelf. So the shelves are very strong. Here's the frame for one of the cupboards outside after I've painted it. You can see that the shelves are recessed, as I said earlier, by that amount. I've welded the hinges to the frame. They get screwed to the door panels, but that's an easy, quick and very strong way of attaching the hinges. And you can see that because the side frames and the shelf frames were all made in jigs, or in 2 different jigs, they're all the same, and therefore it all goes together relatively easily. A lot of steel though in this frame, and a lot of steel is needed for the strength. So back again to looking into the open doors of one of these cupboards. Again, you can see the steel frame, you can see the thickness of the shelves, you can see the heavy front doors, and now you can see why those heavy front doors were needed. Here I've put shelves, and I've made little plywood trays that fit on those shelves so I can carry different things, tape, paint, glue and so on. But look over here. Here are some of my imperial mixed fasteners. I tend to work largely in metric, but obviously every now and again you'll come across a machine that needs imperial, and these are quite heavy, and yet the doors can support them without any dramas. Here's my mixed fasteners, odds and sods, but they're all metric, so that's why they're in a separate shelf, and that one weighs a lot. Up here are boxes I've made, open boxes I've made from plywood. Again, easy to store things, easy to slot them in and out. Something a bit different now. I end up with lots of small pieces of steel angle, steel plate, always very, very useful. But how do you store it? How do you store it so you can access it? So these are trays. Now the base of the tray is made from the same flooring material that I've been showing you that was used for the shelves in the cupboard. And the sides of the tray are made from 12mm 1/2" plywood. So firstly, they're screwed to the base, to the flooring base, and then they're screwed and glued together. Now, you might say, so what? They're just trays, but they're extremely strong trays. And so even if you've got 20, 30, 40 kilograms, 60, 80 pounds of steel offcuts, you can still pull the tray out. It's just sitting on these shelf supports. It's not bolted to these shelf supports. Pull the tray out, select the piece you want, and push it back in. And this is being supported on pallet racking that I use in my workshop for storage of big items. Pallet racking, obviously very, very strong. A lot of weight here. If you are going to make a frame to support these shelves, these open top trays, then you'd have to make it very, very strong. Again, nothing's ever broken. So that 12mm plywood, 1/2" plywood, and the thick base made from flooring, it's worked very, very well. Plenty else in the book, Setting Up a Home Car Workshop, all down to earth practical advice from someone who's doing it every day. I'd be in my home workshop every single day. Today I was in there trying to make a wind turbine work a little bit better than it currently is. Fantastic fun working in a home workshop, and I also did a little bit of work on my dyno in my home workshop today, so that relates more to the car aspects. I recommend the book to you, and I hope that you enjoy it. Thank you.